Hi everyone, my name is Charlotte Cormier. My unit is called Dancing Community. It's for 4th grade and it's based off the artwork called Grooving High by Faith Ringgold, which there's an image of it there. So for the first unit is Social Studies and Art History. So what stood out to me about this painting was everyone in it was African American and they all dressed as if they're in the 50s to 60s era, which that time period was during the Civil Rights Movement. So I would relate the painting to the Civil Rights Movement. I would specifically talk about Ruby Bridges, which is, she's a 6-year-old little girl who a judge ordered to go complete 1st grade at an all-white school in order to desegregate the school. I would read the book, The Story of Ruby Bridges, to the students so that they could get an understanding of the lifestyle and some of the, basically the way that African Americans lived during this era. My social studies standard would be SS4, CG4, which is the students will explain the importance of Americans sharing certain central democratic beliefs and principles, both personal and civic. Objectives would be the students will do a research project on the lifestyles of African Americans in the 1950s and 60s, and the students will present their information by creating a poster board. My abbreviated social studies lesson would be I would start with the painting, have the students say what they see, point out that the type of dress that they people are wearing and that most of them are African American. Well, all of them are African American people. And then I would begin talking about segregation in the 1950s and discuss some of the choices that the artist made in representing the 1950s in the painting. Then I would ask the students to go off on their own and do some research on African Americans in the 1950s and 60s. I would provide them with websites that I have pre-screened and collected for them to do their research on, as well as several books they could use as resources. And they will be using a graphic organizer to collect and record their information. And then they will take that information from the graphic organizer and put the information onto a poster board and present it to their peers. So assessment 1 would be the students fill out the graphic organizer. Assessment 2 would be the students design a poster with at least 3 pictures and 5 facts about African Americans in the 1950s and 60s. Second mini lesson is language, arts, and aesthetics. So when I look at the painting, I see a story being told of people in a community going out and dancing. And so this can relate to language arts because children can write about stories of events that they've went to. So I would introduce the painting and then I would ask these questions about aesthetics. I would ask, why do you like the painting? List some adjectives to describe it. And what would you change about the artwork if you could? My language arts standards are ELA GSE 4W3, which is write narratives to develop real or imagined experiences or events using effective technique, descriptive details, and clear sequence of events. My objectives would be the students will write a narrative about an enjoyable activity or event done with family, and the children will illustrate their story. My abbreviated lesson, I would start by showing the children the painting, and then I would ask if anyone can come up with a story to go along with the painting. I would have a few children tell their stories, and then I would, after each story is told, show the correlation between what you see in the image and the words and how the story was told by the student. And then I would introduce their assignment, which I would have them write a narrative about an enjoyable activity or event that they have done with family, and then they will be instructed to illustrate their story. and their illustrations have to directly correlate to their story. An observer of just the illustration should be able to infer a story that is similar to the one that they are writing. And then I would also show them how what they are doing is similar to what authors and illustrators do for children's books. My assessment for this, for the narrative, I would create a checklist which the students would have to include 2 or more characters, a setting, activity and event, descriptive details, and a closing. And then for the illustration would have to consist of characters, setting, and details expressed in the story. And then for the third mini lesson is on mathematics. And this painting relates to mathematics because the floor is made up of geometric shapes. That's made up of diamonds. So I would introduce the painting and then ask these art criticism questions. I would ask, list what you see in the artwork, list the elements and principles of art found in the artwork, what is the artist trying to say, and is this work a good example of an art style? My math standards for this are MGSE 4 G2, which is classify two-dimensional figures based on the presence or absence of parallel or perpendicular lines, or the presence or absence of angles as a specified size. Recognize right triangles as a category and identify right triangles. My objectives would be the students will identify two-dimensional figures, and the students will solve a word problem involving how many floor tiles, which will be squares, can fit into a room, which will be a rectangle. My abbreviated math lesson, I would point out the painting. I would have the students recognize the geometric shapes used to create tile on the floor, and then I will relate geometric shapes to tiles, and I would have the students decide how many tiles it would take to redo a certain floor plan. And the students will learn that shapes can be used to make up larger shapes. So squares can be used to make up a rectangle. The assessment I would use would be the students will correctly label two-dimensional shapes on a worksheet, and then the students will solve the word problem presented about tiling the room correctly. My next lesson is science and art project. Looking at the painting, you see people dancing, which dancing involves force and motion. So that's how it relates to science. So I would introduce the painting and have the students describe what they see, and then ask them how dancing can relate to force and motion. My standards would be S4P3, which is students will demonstrate the relationship between the application of a force and the resulting change in position and motion on an object. My visual arts standards would be VA4MC3. Selects and uses subject matter symbols and or ideas to communicate meaning. My objectives would be, for science, the student will demonstrate and explain how force can affect the position or motion of an object. And then for visual arts, the materials that you would need would be a pencil, eraser, paint, paintbrushes, and water. And then the students would create a painting that portrays an object in motion. The students beforehand would observe several different paintings, including the Grooving High painting, that depict motion, and discuss some techniques that they could use in their own paintings to portray an object in motion. My abbreviated science lesson, I'll start with the painting image and connect that to the force and motion, and then I will ask students to define force and motion. And then I will have a pendulum set up and demonstrate how force can affect the position and motion of an object. And then after my demonstration, I would have the students pair up, and they would each have their own pendulum with different set sizes of pendulums that they could experiment with, and observe the effect that the size and weight of objects have on the amount of force needed and the way that an object moves. And then my assessment for this, for the science, would be they would complete a worksheet with questions involving force. And then for art, the students, I would observe the students painting, and they would have to depict an object that appears to be in motion, and the object should not appear to be static at all. And that is my lesson plan. Thank you.